"We're closed." The sign was ready to flip when Linda saw them. 12 truckers stranded in the blizzard with nowhere to go. Her husband's diner was failing. But that night, she served these strangers with her last supplies anyway. 2 days later, the ground would literally shake as something extraordinary rolled into town. For 30 years, Tom's pit stop had been the heart of Highway 29, a haven for travelers and truckers alike. When Tom Carson died of a heart attack 5 years ago, his widow Linda had promised to keep it going. But then, the highway department rerouted the main road 5 miles east, and everything changed. Now, as winter's early darkness settled over the empty diner, Linda tallied the day's earnings, exactly 27.43s. Not even enough to cover the electricity bill, let alone make a dent in the mortgage that was 3 months overdue. The clock above the grill read 6:45 p.m. 15 minutes until she could officially flip the sign to "closed" and head up to her small apartment above the diner. Not that it would make much difference. The snow had been falling steadily since noon, and the forecast promised the worst blizzard in 30 years. No one was crazy enough to be out on a night like this. No one, except Linda Carson. 5 years ago, when her husband Tom passed away from a sudden heart attack, Linda had promised him she'd keep their diner going. For 30 years, Tom's pit stop had been a fixture on Highway 29, serving hot coffee and home-cooked meals to travelers, locals, and especially the truckers. Tom had once been a trucker himself before settling down. "Best damn chicken fried steak between Chicago and Denver," Tom used to boast. And he wasn't wrong, but that was before the highway department rerouted the main thoroughfare 5 miles east 3 years ago. Before the steady stream of customers dwindled to a trickle, then to almost nothing, before the bank started sending notices with words like "foreclosure" and "final warning." Linda sighed as she glanced at the final notice tucked beneath the register, 3 months behind with no way to catch up. The diner had been on the market for 6 months, without a single bite. Who wanted a roadside restaurant with no road? The bell above the door jingled, startling Linda from her thoughts. She looked up to see a man stomping snow from his boots, his trucker cap pulled low over his eyes. "Evening, ma'am," he said, his voice deep and rough from years of cigarettes or road dust or both. "Any chance you're still serving? It's a mess out there." Linda glanced at the clock again. 6:50 p.m. "Kitchen's still open for a few minutes," she found herself saying. "What can I get you?" "Coffee, black, and whatever's hot," the man said, settling his large frame onto a stool. "Name's Ray. Appreciate you being open. They've closed the highway 10 miles back. Complete whiteout conditions." Linda froze, coffee pot in hand. "Closed the highway for how long?" Ray shrugged. Massive shoulders. "Till morning at least. Way it's coming down. I was lucky to make it this far before they blocked it off." As if on cue, the bell jingled again. 2 more truckers entered, bringing swirls of snow and the scent of diesel. Then another 3. By 7:15 p.m., Linda had served the last of her day's soup and was frantically working the grill to keep up with orders. A dozen truckers now filled her normally empty diner, their voices a low rumble of road stories and weather reports. "Jenny," Linda called to her young waitress, who was hurrying between tables. "Can you check what's left in the freezer? We're running low on everything." Jenny, a lanky 22-year-old who'd stuck with Linda despite the occasional late paychecks, nodded and disappeared into the back. Linda had told her not to come in today because of the weather, but Jenny had shown up anyway. "Can't let you face the dinner rush alone," she'd joked. Neither of them had expected an actual rush. "You folks planning to head out once you've eaten?" Linda asked Ray, who seemed to have become the unofficial spokesman for the group. Ray shook his head. "No, ma'am. Highway Patrol says nothing's moving till morning at the earliest. Motels in town are already full with stranded travelers. Looks like we'll be sleeping in our rigs tonight." Linda glanced out the window. The snow was now coming down so thick she could barely see the outlines of the big trucks parked in her lot and along the roadside. The temperature had dropped well below freezing, and the wind was picking up, howling around the corners of the old building. "You can't sleep in your trucks in this," she said before she could stop herself. "You'll freeze." "Wouldn't be the first time," another trucker chimed in. But Linda could see the concern on their faces. Most long-haul rigs weren't meant to idle all night, especially not in this kind of cold. Linda thought of the empty diner, the mounting bills, the final notice. She thought of Tom, who had spent 15 years as a trucker himself before they saved enough to buy this place. She remembered his stories of kind strangers during breakdowns and blizzards. "The diner's open all night," she heard herself say. "And I've got a small apartment upstairs with a couple of spare blankets. Not much, but it's warm." Ray looked at her with surprise. "You'd do that for a bunch of strangers?" Linda's eyes drifted to the photograph behind the counter. Tom in his trucker days, standing proudly beside his rig. "My husband would never turn away a driver in need," she said simply. As the night progressed, the blizzard intensified. The power flickered once, twice, then stabilized. The ancient heating system groaned in protest against the bitter cold. Around 10 p.m., it made an ominous clunking sound, then died completely. "I know a bit about these old systems," Ray offered, setting down his third cup of coffee. "Mind if I take a look?" Linda led him to the utility room, where Ray spent 20 minutes tinkering with the furnace before it reluctantly rumbled back to life. "Should hold through the night," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "But you might want to get someone to look at it properly when this weather clears." "Add it to the list," Linda murmured. Ray eyed her curiously. "Tough times." Linda usually kept her troubles to herself, but something about the genuine concern in his voice broke through her resolve. "The new highway route took most of my business 3 years ago. Been barely hanging on since." She nodded toward the window where the edge of a snow-covered "For Sale" sign was barely visible. "This month's probably my last." Ray nodded thoughtfully but said nothing more. By midnight, Linda had exhausted nearly every scrap of food in the diner. She'd made sandwiches, heated the last of 3 different soups, and brewed countless pots of coffee. When she realized it wouldn't be enough to last the night, she'd trudged through the snow to her apartment to raid her personal supplies. The truckers tried to pay, but Linda waved them off. "Your company is payment enough," she told them. "Been too quiet around here since the highway changed." As the night wore on, the truckers shared stories of the road, close calls and bad weather, unusual cargo, the characters they'd met along the way. Linda found herself laughing for the first time in months. "This place reminds me of a diner up in Nebraska," one of the older drivers said. "Run by an ex-trucker who made the best apple pie you ever tasted." "What was the name of it?" another asked. "Don't recall exactly. Something like Tommy's or Tom's place. Ray, who had been examining the photographs on the wall, suddenly turned. Was the owner's name Tom Carson, by any chance? Linda's head snapped up. You knew Tom? Ray was staring at a particular photo now. Tom with a group of fellow truckers at a truck stop somewhere in Wyoming circa 1998. Is this him? Tom Carson? Linda nodded, moving to stand beside Ray. Well, I'll be damned, Ray said softly. He helped me once, years back. My rig broke down in the middle of nowhere, middle of winter. No cell service back then. Tom stopped. Helped me fix it enough to limp to the next town. Wouldn't take a dime for his trouble. That sounds like Tom, Linda said, her voice catching. You're Tom Carson's wife? Another trucker joined them, peering at the photo. The Tom Carson who used to run CB Channel 19 during the big storms, guiding folks through the mountain passes? Warmth spread through Linda's chest. He loved that old CB. Said it was a trucker's lifeline. She pointed to the base unit, still sitting on a shelf behind the counter, silent for years now. I could never bring myself to move it. One by one, the truckers began to share stories about Tom. How he'd helped one deliver emergency supplies after a flood. How he'd talked another through a panic attack on an icy mountain road. How his voice on the CB had been a welcome companion during lonely night drives. Linda found herself torn between tears and laughter as these strangers painted a picture of the man she'd loved, not just as she had known him, but as a legend of the open road. He never told me half these stories, she admitted. That's Tom, Ray said with a knowing smile. Never one to brag. By dawn, the snow had stopped, though drifts piled 6 feet high in some places. The highway remained closed while plows worked to clear the roads. Linda, who had caught only fragments of sleep between keeping the coffee flowing and making sure everyone was comfortable, was exhausted but strangely invigorated. When the highway patrol finally announced the roads would reopen by noon, there was an almost reluctant atmosphere among the truckers as they prepared to leave. What do we owe you? Ray asked, reaching for his wallet. Linda shook her head. Not a thing. It was my pleasure. You can't mean that. We cleaned you out of nearly every scrap of food and gave me the best night I've had in years, Linda countered. Consider it payback for all the times Tom helped one of you out there on the road. The truckers insisted on at least leaving generous tips for Jenny, who had stayed all night despite Linda's protests. Ray was the last to leave, lingering by the counter. That for sale sign, he said finally. Is it the diner or the whole property? Both, Linda replied. The apartment upstairs goes with it. Bank's foreclosing end of the month if I can't catch up on the mortgage. Ray nodded, his expression unreadable. Shame to see a place with this much history disappear. Life moves on, Linda said, trying to sound matter-of-fact rather than heartbroken. The new highway moved, so I guess I will too. After the last truck pulled away, the diner felt emptier than ever. Linda and Jenny spent the afternoon cleaning up and taking inventory of what little remained in the pantry. You should take tomorrow off, Linda told Jenny. I can't afford to order more supplies until Friday anyway. I'll come in, Jenny insisted. Someone might stop by. But no one did. The next day, Linda served exactly 2 customers, an elderly couple who'd been coming every Wednesday for 30 years. They left a $20 tip on a $15 bill, patting her hand, with sad smiles that said they knew it might be their last meal there. That evening, Linda began packing some of Tom's mementos into boxes. The for sale sign hadn't generated any interest, and she needed to be prepared for the inevitable. She carefully wrapped the CB radio base, her fingers lingering on the volume knob Tom had adjusted countless times. "Miss you, old man," she whispered. "I tried." She was so lost in memory that she almost didn't hear it at first, the distinctive sound of air brakes outside the diner. Linda glanced out the window, expecting to see one of yesterday's truckers, who perhaps had forgotten something. Instead, she saw Ray's truck pulling into the lot, and behind it another semi and another and another. Linda stepped outside, bewildered as truck after truck pulled in, filling her parking lot and then lining up along the roadside in both directions. Some honked their horns in greeting. All of them had their headlights on, despite the early evening sun. Ray was the first to approach, a broad smile breaking through his normally serious demeanor. "What is this?" Linda asked, her voice nearly drowned out by the rumble of diesel engines. "We got to talking," Ray said, "on the CB, on the truckers' forums online, about you, about Tom, about this place." He gestured to the growing line of trucks. "Turns out nearly every driver out there has a Tom Carson story or knows someone who does." A crowd was gathering now. Drivers from all over, many Linda didn't recognize from the night of the blizzard. "Tom helped me change a tire outside Omaha in '95, one called out. "He talked me through my first mountain pass during a snowstorm," said another. "When I was a rookie, he showed me how to properly secure a flatbed load," a young woman added. Ray turned back to Linda, whose hands had flown to her mouth in shock. "Tom's legacy deserves better than a foreclosure sign, so we made some calls." From the crowd emerged a man in a company polo shirt, rather than the typical trucker attire. "Mrs. Carson, I'm William Porter, regional manager for Porter Hall Trucking. We've got 50 rigs that make this run regularly. My drivers need a place where they're treated like family, not just customers. I'd like to work out a regular schedule for my fleet to stop here." Before Linda could respond, another company representative stepped forward, then another. Ray handed her an envelope thick with cash. "Donations?" he explained. "From trucking companies? Independent drivers? People who remember Tom? Or who heard what you did during the blizzard? Should be enough to catch up the mortgage and restock your supplies." Linda's vision blurred with tears. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep this place going," Ray replied. "For Tom. For all of us who need a place that feels like home on the road." An older trucker approached, carrying something in his weathered hands. "Found this in my storage last night," he said, holding out a CB radio handset. "Tom gave it to me when my own broke 20 years ago. Said he had a spare. Figured it should come back home." Linda took the handset, her hands trembling. It matched perfectly with the base unit still sitting behind her counter. A perfect fit, just like these people who had suddenly filled the empty space in her life. "There's one more thing," Ray said, leading Linda back toward the diner entrance. A young man stood there, looking nervous, but determined. "Mrs. Carson, I'm Kevin Miller. I'm a graphic designer when I'm not helping my dad with his rig. We thought maybe—" He unrolled a large paper to reveal a design for a new sign. "Tom and Linda's Trucker Haven." "The old highway might have moved," Ray said quietly, "but we know how to spread the word. Every trucker in 6 states will know about this place by the end of the week." The CB radio crackled to life, for the first time in years, making Linda jump. Someone had connected the handset and turned it on. Voices filtered through, truckers telling others about Tom's place, Linda's cooking, and the best stop on the new route. Jenny appeared at Linda's side, wide-eyed at the crowd. "Should I start some coffee?" she asked with a growing smile. Linda looked at the sea of faces, at the line of trucks stretching into the distance, at the diner that had been empty for so long, now buzzing with new energy. She thought of Tom, of his kindness that had rippled outward for decades without her even knowing. "Start the coffee," she said, wiping away tears. "And call Darla and Miguel to see if they can come help. Something tells me we're going to need more staff." 6 months later, Tom and Linda's trucker haven was nearly unrecognizable. The mortgage was paid in full. The parking lot had been expanded. A small trucker lounge with shower facilities had been added to one side of the building. The staff had grown from just Linda and Jenny to a team of 7. The CB radio remained in its place of honor behind the counter, always on. Linda had learned to use it, often sharing weather and road updates just like Tom used to do. Sometimes, late at night when the diner was quiet, she'd hear truckers sharing Tom's stories over the airwaves. Some she recognized, others she'd never heard before. Each one was a gift, a new piece of the man she'd loved. On the 1-year anniversary of the blizzard that had changed everything, Linda hung a new photograph on the wall. It showed her surrounded by dozens of truckers from that first night when they'd returned with their surprise. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "Family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's who shows up when the road